budget is in trouble. You've heard all the lines. $1 trillion of Liberal Party debt, growing responsibilities, increased pressure on the NDIS, Medicare and Social Security, and now we're going to spend about $400 billion on submarines over the next 30 years.
The detail of the cost of these subs will emerge, but this is not for the faint-hearted.
It's the biggest procurement in Australia's history.
We can't possibly still be proceeding with the Stage 3 tax cuts, right? I mean, who in their right mind would think, let's take another $250 billion out of the budget in revenue over the next 10 years to help the wealthy? And yet, here we are.
This is a huge amount of money that's going to be spent, and we have to ask the question, how are we going to afford this in the context of tax cuts coming next year?
So why is Labor holding on to the Stage 3 tax cuts? And what does that say about our ability to have politicians respond to changing circumstances? But first, some history. In 2018, Scott Morrison, as Treasurer, announced he was reforming the tax system.
This means more working Australians paying lower taxes on every extra dollar they earn. There must be reward for effort.
There were 3 stages. The first stages introduced a temporary low and middle income tax offset and increased the earning thresholds for the 19% and 32.5% tax brackets. The third was to bump the threshold for when the 45% tax rate kicked in and abolish the 37% tax bracket altogether, creating a flat tax rate. After winning the 2019 election, Morrison decided to go further, and his government announced more changes to Stage 3.
This is a win for those hard-working Australians quietly going about their lives. And these are the people we will keep our faith with every single day.
They dropped the 32.5% tax rate to 30% and raised the earning threshold for when it kicked in to $45,000. So from July 2024, when the third stage is legislated to begin, people earning between $45,001 and $200,000 will pay a flat tax of 30%. So Australia's tax brackets will go from looking like this to looking like this. All up, it's going to cost the budget about $250 billion over the next decade in lost revenue.
So something like $750 billion over the 30 years, plenty to pay for the subs program and more to go back to the budget to be spent on other projects.
Plus, it destroys Australia's progressive tax system. The idea that the more you earn and the wealthier you are, the more tax you pay. And they really only help people earning over $120,000, particularly those who earn over $180,000. They'll see their tax drop.
The world's turned on its head since those tax cuts were introduced. People like me don't need tax cuts.
Around 90% of taxpayers earn less than $120,000 a year.
We've got a housing and rental debacle. We have staff and skill shortages and supply chain issues. We're just sending the wrong message to the Australian people at this time that tax cuts for the wealthier cohort of our community are acceptable.
So why is Labor holding on? Well, because it said it would.
People are entitled to have that certainty of the tax cuts that have been legislated.
They don't come in for some time.
Labor voted for the tax package because the Morrison government wouldn't split the bill, giving the reason it didn't want to hold back tax relief for low and middle income earners.
I think it's really important, for example, that in those tax cuts they kick in at $45,000. We've always been up for tax relief for people on modest incomes.
And then Labor went to the election with a small target strategy, which meant minimising any fight. And that meant they stayed committed to no changes to Stage 3.
Would you be prepared to support a deferral or a cancelling of the $240 billion Stage 3 tax cuts?
Well, Paul, the government went to the last election with a commitment for the tax cuts. They knew about AUKUS.
And now here we are, with pressure on the NDIS, Medicare and health systems, hearing the constant refrain that there is no money for raising the job seeker rate, and committed to spending hundreds of billions of dollars on defence, and still hearing our position on Stage 3 hasn't changed.
Where do you want the money spent? Do you want it to go on nuclear-powered submarines being built over the next 30 years to ensure Australia's security in the region? Or would you like to see it to go to rich people in tax cuts they probably don't need?
Not because it's good policy, but because political discourse in this country is broken. Questioning the Stage 3 tax cuts would create immediate screams of broken promises, which, after what happened with the Gillard government and the carbon price, is not a path any Labor government is willing to walk.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. I'm not going to get hung up on word games.
This is the mother of all taxes.
Because there are people now saying your name is not Julia, but Julia.
It doesn't matter that the carbon price wasn't and never was a tax. It matters that the coalition sold it as one, and then convinced voters it was a broken election promise. You saw what happened around the very modest superannuation tax changes.
How on earth could you believe them? How could you believe anything the Prime Minister says? And their own superannuation money is under attack from the Labor Party, who, when they run out of their own money, comes after yours.
That would seem rational compared to what the coalition would do if Labor altered stage 3. And the very threat of that is enough to shut down any debate.
This is Australians' money. I'm very confident this is just the beginnings. It's a broken election promise.
How much integrity is there in a broken election promise? Are you going to apologise to the Australian people?
So just say, yes, that you absolutely guarantee no change ever to the capital gains tax exemption on our family home.
Now, it's not something I've been thinking about, working up, contemplating.
Just say guarantee.
Now, it's important to note that Jim Chalmers hasn't ruled out any changes for good. He and the Prime Minister just keep saying our position on that hasn't changed. And the language is important because it doesn't mean the position won't ever change, it's just not changing now. At the same time, there's been no appetite within the Labor caucus for boldness, even when it's in the best interests of the country, at least not yet. History tells us that governments usually do their big reforms or make their big changes in the first term after being elected, when they've got the most political capital. But so far on stage 3, we're hearing nada.
So we'll continue to have a conversation with the Australian people about what's needed going forward. We won't be able to do everything that we would like to do.
That has led to chatter in 3 directions. 1, there is a chance Anthony Albanese pulls a Bob Hawke and goes to an early election next year to get the mandate to alter stage 3. Or 2, the public discomfort with the reforms becomes so loud the government uses the groundswell to act, or at least delay the start date of the changes.
I can think of a number of measures that I would like to do, but part of the message is that we are a responsible government when it comes to fiscal policy.
Or 3, nothing happens, and stage 3 rolls through as legislated, and we begin hearing a lot about austerity and why we can't do things like raise the rate.